"My mommy is sick, but she still works at night," the little girl whispered, and the CEO couldn't stay silent anymore. The December rain was relentless, hammering against the towering glass facade of Grayson Holdings like a warning from the sky. It was nearly midnight in New York, and the city was drowning in a cold, gray storm. Most of the building had gone dark, but on the 25th floor, a single office still glowed with sterile white light. Inside, Thomas Grayson sat behind his sleek desk, the CEO of the multi-billion-dollar empire bearing his name. His fingers hovered above his keyboard, motionless. The coffee in his mug had long since gone cold. Numbers and reports flickered on his screen, but his mind was elsewhere, floating in a silence that had become too familiar. The clock struck 11. With a sigh, Thomas closed his laptop, shrugged on his long wool coat, and exited his office. The echo of his footsteps followed him down the corridor, then faded as he stepped into the elevator. As the elevator doors slid open to the lobby, Thomas stepped out and stopped abruptly. There, on the far end of the marble-floored lobby, a small figure sat curled up on the long bench near the revolving doors. A little girl, no older than 5, hugged a worn backpack to her chest. Her light blonde hair was damp, clinging to her pale cheeks. Her coat was thin and soaked through. She didn't shiver. She just sat there, waiting. Her eyes lifted to meet his, large, round, and a startling shade of blue. There was no fear in them, just quiet hope. Thomas hesitated, his hand still in his coat pocket. He could have walked past. He had walked past far worse things in life, but something in that gaze made him stop. He took a slow step forward, then another. "What are you doing here, little one?" His voice was hoarse from hours of disuse. The girl didn't flinch. She spoke softly, almost like she didn't want to disturb the silence. "I'm waiting for my mommy. She's working upstairs." Thomas frowned. "Upstairs? Everyone's gone home. What does your mother do?" She gave a tiny smile. It didn't reach her eyes. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "She cleans the building. But my mommy is sick. I don't know the name of the sickness. She holds her tummy and shakes sometimes, but she told me not to tell anyone, because if she loses her job, we won't have money to buy her medicine." Thomas stood still. Something in his chest shifted painfully, like a door cracking open in a long abandoned room. For a second, he couldn't breathe. He looked down at the little girl again, and all he could see was another pair of tired eyes, from decades ago. His mother, bent over a mop bucket, wiping floors in the middle of the night so he could go to school, her hands raw from cleaning chemicals, her back hunched from years of silent sacrifice. The woman he couldn't even say goodbye to. He had been too late. He swallowed hard. The rain continued to lash against the glass, echoing like guilt in the cavern of his heart. The girl pulled her coat tighter, her voice barely audible. "I just wait a little while. When mommy finishes, we go home. I don't want her to walk alone in the rain." Thomas looked away, blinking against the sudden burn in his eyes. This wasn't his problem. He wasn't responsible. But as he looked back at the child, so small, so calm, so uncomplaining, something inside him fractured. He couldn't explain it, didn't want to, but he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't walk away. Not this time. Not again. The city lights shimmered outside the glass windows of Thomas's penthouse, reflecting off the rain-soaked streets far below. But inside, the apartment was dark. He sat alone at the edge of his bed, bathed in the blue glow of his laptop screen. Sleep had never come easily to him, but tonight it felt impossible. That little girl's voice still echoed in his head. "If she loses her job, we won't have money to buy her medicine." He opened a secure portal into the Grayson Holdings employee database. His fingers hovered above the keyboard before he began to type slowly. Emma Carter. A file loaded. A photo appeared. A young woman, 28 years old, light blonde hair pulled back into a neat bun, pale skin, hollow cheeks, kind, tired eyes. Thomas leaned forward. She didn't look like someone who belonged in the night crew. She looked like someone who once had dreams, He scanned through the notes in her file. Former medical student, Columbia University. Left during 3rd year. No emergency contact. Working night shifts at Grayson Holdings for 7 months. No participation in company healthcare benefits. 4 days of unexplained leave in the last quarter. Rated as quiet, punctual, diligent. There were no disciplinary marks, no complaints, no red flags, just silence. She had flown under the radar, unnoticed. The next morning, Thomas arrived at the office earlier than usual. He walked past the security team and made his way to the surveillance room. The staff didn't ask questions. No one dared to when the CEO appeared unannounced. "I want to review camera footage from the 14th floor janitorial corridor." "Last night and the previous week," Thomas said, his voice clipped. A technician queued up the footage. Thomas leaned in, arms folded, watching the black and white screen. There she was. Emma Carter, small frame, head down, moving methodically with her mop and cart. In one clip, she paused, gripping the wall with one hand, the other clutching her side. Her knees buckled slightly. She stood there, breathing heavily. Then, she kept going, as if nothing had happened. Another recording. Emma sat down for a moment, clearly exhausted. Her body slumped, but when another employee entered the hallway, she immediately stood, forced a polite smile, and resumed cleaning. It wasn't just fatigue. It was something deeper, something she was trying hard to hide. Thomas narrowed his eyes. Later that day, he summoned Janet, the supervisor of the night cleaning staff. "I need to know if anyone on your team has shown signs of illness," he said evenly. Janet hesitated. Well, not officially. Most of them push through, but Emma Carter, she's tough. I mean, she always volunteers for overtime, but I've seen her rubbing her hands like they're shaking, pale some nights, like she's about to faint." Thomas said nothing, just stared at her. Janet looked uneasy and added quietly, "I asked her once if she was okay. She just smiled and said, 'I can't afford to be sick. My daughter needs me.' That's all she ever says." He dismissed the supervisor with a nod. Back in his office, Thomas sat at his desk, staring out at the storm beyond the windows. Emma Carter had once walked the halls of Columbia University with the dream of becoming a doctor. Now she scrubbed the floors of his company at night, hiding a debilitating illness, pushing through every shift, all for the sake of a little girl who waited in the lobby with a soaked backpack and wide blue eyes. He returned to the security footage. Watching one last clip, Emma's mop broke mid-shift. Without hesitating, she got down on her knees and started cleaning with a cloth, using her bare hands. Thomas leaned back in his chair, the breath caught in his chest. "How does someone like that survive this long?" he murmured aloud. But the question wasn't rhetorical. He wasn't really asking about her. He was remembering another woman, another night, a janitor with cracked hands and tired eyes. His mother. In that moment, his polished office, his tailored suit, the penthouse apartment, all of it felt irrelevant. He wasn't looking at a name on a file anymore. He was seeing her, a mother who carried the world alone, and he had missed his chance once. He would not miss it again. The office was quiet. It was well past midnight. Soft classical music played from a speaker in the corner, something by Chopin, gentle and haunting. The city lights shimmered through the glass walls of Thomas Grayson's corner office, but he barely noticed. He sat at his desk, jacket off, sleeves rolled up. In front of him was an open drawer, and in his hand, an old photograph. A woman, thin face, cracked, dry hands, a tired but tender smile. Her hair was pulled back in a bun. Her eyes carried both love and exhaustion. His mother. Thomas touched the photo gently, brushing his thumb across the corners as if the memory might fall apart if he wasn't careful. His eyes burned. He had been only a boy when she cleaned middle school classrooms late into the night. He used to wait for her outside the janitor's room, curled up on a plastic chair, pretending not to notice how kids looked at him differently when they saw his mother with a mop. But he never cared. She was his entire world. She worked double shifts, skipped meals, wore cheap shoes that left her feet blistered, all to keep food on their table, and send him to school with a full backpack and a hopeful future. He remembered one night, colder than most. Snow had blanketed the city. He had called her, but she didn't answer. Thought she was still working. She never came home. They found her collapsed on the floor of the girls' restroom at the school. Alone, the custodian who came in for the morning shift was the one who called for help. It had been too late. Thomas had been in his first year at university. He arrived one day too late to say goodbye. His throat tightened now at the thought. He looked at the photo again. "I promised I'd take care of you," he whispered, "and you still died. Alone." Slowly, he set the picture down on the desk. Next to it, a printed file, Emma Carter's employee profile. He stared at her name, and at the grainy black and white image of her mopping a hallway in the middle of the night. A single mother, breaking her body to provide for her daughter, hiding her illness just to keep her job. No one watching, no one helping. He reached for his phone and called the head of human resources. "This is Thomas Grayson," he said, voice low. "I need you to make a few adjustments to a file." Quietly, he gave them a name, Emma Carter. Instructions came clearly, one after the other. Conduct a performance reevaluation and increase her base pay by 15%, effective immediately. Reassign her cleaning duties to the lower traffic areas, somewhere closer to the elevator. Lighter workload. Enroll her in the health monitoring program. She doesn't need to apply. Mark it under Anonymous Welfare Initiative. Then he called the night staff coordinator. "One more thing," he said. "If Emma Carter ever requests a schedule change, give it to her. No questions asked, no delays." There was silence on the other end of the line. "Yes, sir." He hung up. No fanfare. No one would know he did it. He didn't want credit. He didn't want gratitude. This wasn't charity. It was a debt. He pulled a leather-bound notebook from his drawer, his private journal, the one no one knew existed. He turned to a fresh page and began to write. "Somewhere out there is a woman breaking apart a little more each night. Just like my mother did. No one saw her then. But I see her now." He paused, then added, "If this is redemption, I'll take it. If it's too late for one mother, let me be on time for another." He closed the journal slowly, placed it back in the drawer, and leaned back in his chair. The storm outside had slowed, but inside Thomas Grayson, something had started to move again. A soft, painful thaw in a heart that had been frozen far too long. And for the first time in years, he knew exactly what he had to do. It had been a week since Emma began noticing the quiet changes. Her shift had been moved to the 10th floor, cleaner, quieter, with fewer people and easier access to supplies. The break room always had warm water now. A brand new mop leaned against the wall. Soft, folded towels appeared nightly in a small basket by the sink. Odd, she thought. Even stranger, her latest pay stub showed a slight increase. She hadn't worked overtime. She hadn't asked for a raise. At first, she assumed it was a clerical error, maybe a base pay adjustment across the board, but something didn't sit right. One early morning, as her shift ended and the building stirred with the arrival of early executives, Emma approached her floor supervisor. "Excuse me," she said calmly. "Why was I moved to the 10th floor? I didn't request a change." The man, middle-aged and not fond of conversation, looked briefly uncomfortable. "I was told to reassign your floor," he replied, avoiding eye contact. "Internal notes said, you should be closer to the elevators. You know, easier access." Emma frowned. "Who left the note?" "I think it came from upper management," he said after a pause. "That's all I know." Emma couldn't shake the feeling. In her world, unexpected kindness often came with strings or consequences. Later that afternoon, she stopped by the administrative office under the pretense of checking schedules. She lingered long enough to chat with a junior staffer she'd once helped carry boxes. They liked her, trusted her. When she asked casually, "Hey, do you happen to know who signed off on my transfer?" The reply was quick and low. "Mr. Grayson, I think. His signature was on the request form." Emma froze. as though the floor had shifted beneath her feet. That evening, after dropping Amy at preschool and walking through the chilled morning sun, she took the elevator to the top floor of Grayson Holdings. She had never been there before. At reception, the woman at the desk looked up. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked politely. "No," Emma said, brushing her damp hair behind one ear. Her uniform was still on. Her hands still smelled faintly of disinfectant. "My name is Emma Carter." The receptionist blinked, then nodded slowly. "One moment." A few seconds later, Emma stood outside a sleek frosted glass door. When it opened, Thomas Grayson looked up from his desk. He didn't appear surprised to see her. Emma stepped in slowly. Her eyes were tired, but steady. "I came to thank you," she said softly, "and to ask you to stop." Thomas rose from his chair. "Emma, I know it was you," she said, her voice trembling just slightly. "The shift change, the raise, the mop. You went through my file. You tried to help me." She paused, drawing a breath. "I'm grateful. But I can't accept this. I didn't earn it. I didn't ask for it. And I don't want my daughter growing up thinking her mother needed to be rescued." Thomas's jaw clenched, just for a moment, but his voice stayed even. "You weren't rescued," he said. "You were seen." Emma shook her head. "You don't understand," she said. "If I die tomorrow, I want Amy to remember me as someone who fought for everything we had, not someone who survived on the pity of a stranger." He stepped closer, voice quieter now. "You're not a stranger to me. You're a mother, just like mine was, and I was too late for her." Emma's breath caught in her throat, but still, she held her ground. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said, "but I need to be able to look my daughter in the eyes and tell her I did this myself." Thomas didn't argue. He didn't plead. He simply nodded, slowly, with respect. "I understand." Emma turned. Her back was straight. Her hands clenched slightly at her sides. When the elevator doors closed behind her, Thomas remained standing in the middle of the room. He did not feel rejected. He felt humbled. She had turned down a gift that most would have clung to, not out of pride but out of something deeper. Love, resolve, a mother's dignity. And in that refusal, she had earned more of his admiration than anyone in his polished boardroom ever had. Nearly a month had passed since Emma last spoke to Thomas. Winter had tightened its grip on the city. Snow clung to corners, wind cut deep, and the nights stretched longer. Emma was still working the night shift. Despite her worsening condition, she refused time off. Each night, she left Amy with a small thermos of warm milk and a storybook, then disappeared through the revolving doors of Grayson Holdings like nothing had changed. But something had. The lupus was worsening. Her hands trembled more often. Sometimes she saw blood in the sink after coughing. Her body ached constantly. Sleep barely came. Still, every morning she smiled for Amy, braided her hair, kissed her forehead and said, "Mommy's just tired, sweetheart. Nothing more." That night, she almost made it. She was mopping marble floors on the 15th floor when her vision swam. Her knees buckled. She reached for the wall and missed. Pain surged through her stomach. She collapsed, shoulder hitting tile, cheek pressed to the cold floor. The bucket tipped. Her fingers clawed weakly before short spasms overtook her body. Then, stillness. Downstairs, Amy sat curled on her usual bench. The night guard had seen her before but thought little of it, until now. It was past 1 a.m. Emma should have come down an hour ago. Amy kept glancing toward the elevator. Then she stood, pulled on her backpack, and went to look. She searched floor by floor, peeking into restrooms, knocking gently on janitor closets, whispering, "Mommy?" Her little shoes tapped softly on tile. No answer. On the 12th floor, she spotted the night guard. Tugging on his coat, she looked up with tear-filled eyes. "Mr. My mom hasn't come down. She's sick. She told me not to tell anyone or she might lose her job, but she didn't come back. Please help?" The guard crouched. "What's your mom's name?" "Emma Carter." He radioed it in. Security staff checked the footage. There she was, Emma, collapsed just outside the restroom on the 15th floor, motionless. The call reached the front desk. From there, it went to Thomas. He had just fallen asleep. When the receptionist told him, he was out the door in under 2 minutes. No driver, no coat, just a sweatshirt, sleep pants, and fear. The city flew past as he drove through red lights, heart hammering. At the building, Amy sat on the floor, hugging her backpack, eyes red. Thomas dropped beside her. "Amy," he said softly, "I'm here. Your mom's going to be okay, I promise." She didn't speak. She just leaned into him. Thomas didn't wait for an ambulance. He carried Emma, wrapped in his jacket, into the back of his SUV. Amy climbed in too, buckled herself shakily, and held her mother's limp hand. "Mama," she whispered, "please don't go to sleep forever. Please wake up." Thomas gripped the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He had never felt so helpless. Not in courtrooms, not in boardrooms. Nothing terrified him the way Emma's pale face did in his rearview mirror. At the hospital, the emergency team moved quickly. Emma was taken into the ICU. Thomas sat in the waiting room with Amy in his lap. She clung to him, head tucked under his chin. He held her tightly, barely breathing. Time passed. An hour. Then another. Amy's breathing softened. She fell asleep in his arms. Thomas didn't move. His eyes stayed fixed on the ICU doors. 20 years ago, he had been too late. Too late to say goodbye. Too late to thank his mother. Too late for everything. He had sworn it wouldn't happen again. Not this time. He gently tucked a blanket around Amy's small body. Then, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead, he whispered into the still night air, "This time I'm here. I won't let her go." Emma had survived the worst. She was stable now, the doctor said, but barely. Her body was still in shutdown, her vitals weak, and she remained unconscious. The attending physician described it as exhaustion layered over chronic illness, worsened by malnutrition and severe stress. "She has systemic lupus," the doctor explained to Thomas. "She's been working through flare-ups without proper treatment. Her immune system is attacking her own body. If she keeps living like this, I don't think she'll make it much longer." Thomas sat in the waiting room, shoulders hunched, hands wrapped tightly around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. His eyes stared ahead, unfocused, haunted. He had power, he had money, he had built empires from the ground up. But right now, none of that felt like enough. A soft rustle broke the silence beside him. Amy stirred in the chair next to him, lifting her head from the blanket he had tucked around her hours ago. Her face was flushed from sleep, her voice small and frightened. "Is my mommy still alive?" Thomas turned quickly to her. Her tiny hand reached for his sleeve. "She promised she wouldn't leave me," she said, her voice trembling. Thomas swallowed hard. He leaned down and pulled her gently into his arms. "She's still here, Amy," he said softly. "She's not going anywhere. I promise." Amy didn't respond, just buried her face against his chest. Thomas held her tightly, feeling the familiar ache rise again in his throat. The ache of helplessness, of guilt, of old grief being reawakened by new pain. But he wouldn't let history repeat itself. Not this time. He pulled out his phone. There was only one person he trusted for this. A friend from medical school, now one of the country's leading specialists in autoimmune disorders. "Daniel," Thomas said when the line connected, "I need a favor. A patient. Urgent lupus case. She's unconscious right now. I want her under your care, completely discreet. Register her under the Anonymous Care Fund. I'll cover everything." "Got it," Daniel replied without hesitation. "Send me her charts." Next, Thomas contacted the Human Resources Director at Grayson Holdings. Even though it was nearly 4 a.m., the call was answered on the first ring. "I want Emma Carter's employment protected," Thomas said firmly. "She is to remain on staff, full pay, and receive medical leave for as long as necessary." The HR director hesitated. "We would need documentation for. File it as an internal injury from on-site conditions. Discretion is non-negotiable." "Yes, Mr. Grayson," He ended the call and looked at Amy, now dozing off again, curled next to him. Her small fingers were still wrapped around the corner of his jacket. Later that morning, after Emma had been transferred to a private recovery room, Thomas walked in alone. The hospital room was quiet. The snow outside had lightened to a soft dust. Inside, the machines beeped gently, measuring life 1 second at a time. Emma lay still, her golden hair damp against the pillow, skin pale and lips dry. Tubes and monitors surrounded her, but there was a fragile piece to her face that hadn't been there before. She was finally resting. Thomas sat down beside her bed. He reached out, brushing a few loose strands of hair from her forehead with the back of his fingers. Her skin was cool, but her pulse was steady beneath it. He didn't speak at first. He just watched her, breathing in the stillness, letting the weight of the moment settle into his chest. And then, in a whisper, he said, "This time, I wasn't too late." He didn't know if she could hear him. Maybe she couldn't. Maybe she never would. But that didn't matter. This wasn't about being seen. It wasn't about being thanked. It wasn't about redeeming himself in anyone else's eyes. It was about her. A woman who reminded him so much of his mother, not in age, but in spirit, in strength. In the silent way she fought for her child, even when no one was watching. And this time, someone was watching. He would not fail her. 2 weeks after the hospital, Emma was finally discharged. The color had returned to her cheeks. Her steps were careful but no longer weak. For the first time in months, she didn't feel like she was pretending to be okay. She actually was. The hospital doors slid open. Snow fell gently outside. Waiting at the curb was a modest gray SUV. No limousine. No driver in a suit. Just Thomas, behind the wheel, in a simple coat and scarf, tapping his fingers against the steering wheel. Emma held Amy's hand and approached slowly. "You didn't have to come," she said softly. "I know," Thomas replied, stepping out to open the door. "But I wanted to." Inside the car, the heater hummed. Amy climbed into the back seat and buckled herself in. She looked at him through the rearview mirror. "Mr. Thomas," she asked, "are you a superhero?" Thomas smiled. "No, just someone who used to be very afraid of losing his mom. Like you." Amy nodded, then turned to the snowy window. Emma's recovery wasn't just physical. It was the start of something new. A week later, she returned to work, but not to scrub floors. She accepted a part-time temp role in human resources, organizing basic documents and helping with internal surveys. It was quiet, steady work. No bleach, no overnight shifts. Thomas often stopped by the HR office, not always with purpose, but never without sincerity. One morning, he placed a folder on her desk. "I want your input." Emma blinked. "You're asking me? You've lived what this policy is trying to fix," he said. "Help me get it right." She read it all, made notes. He listened. That struck her the most. He truly listened. One evening, rain began to fall as Emma stepped out of the building. Most had gone home. She opened her umbrella, and there was Thomas holding his own. "Walking?" he asked. Emma nodded. "I like the rain." "Me too," he said. "Can I join you?" They walked side by side. Their umbrellas swayed as mist clung to the pavement and city lights blurred into halos. They talked about childhood, his mother, her dreams, the night Amy was born, the moment he learned money couldn't buy time. "I used to think being strong meant never needing help," Emma said. "Now I wonder if strength is knowing when to accept it." Thomas glanced at her, then up at the soft rain glowing in the lamplight. "If you ever want to study again," he said, "I can help. Not to repay anything, not because you owe anyone, just because you deserve that chance." Emma's fingers tightened around her umbrella. For once, she didn't feel small. Weeks later, the company held a holiday gathering. Soft music played. Twinkling lights hung across the walls. The office felt warmer, softer. Thomas stood near the back of the room, drink in hand. His usual tailored suit, but he looked more relaxed, human. Emma joined him. Amy beside her in a navy dress with a white ribbon in her hair. The three stood together, quietly watching the celebration. A young co-worker nudged another. "Looks like the boss finally found a family," she whispered. Thomas heard. He didn't respond, just smiled. Emma saw his expression. She didn't correct it, didn't explain. She smiled too, soft, quiet. Amy tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mommy," she whispered, "this is the first party we've ever gone to together." Emma knelt down and kissed her forehead. "Well," she said, "it won't be the last." There were no declarations, no grand gestures, but when Thomas's hand hovered, then gently rested on her back as they walked out together, it was enough. A door had opened, and this time, Emma wasn't walking through it alone. 1 year later, the winter had returned, but life felt warmer than ever. Emma Carter was now a student again, proudly pursuing her second degree in public community health. She took evening classes at the local college and spent her mornings helping at a neighborhood clinic. Her schedule was full, her days demanding, but she walked through them with strength, no longer hiding from the world or her illness. Amy, now 6, was thriving. She had been awarded the Little Stars Scholarship from the Mary's Hand Foundation, a fund created by Thomas himself. Inspired by Emma's story, he had founded it to support children of working single mothers. But no one in the company knew that Amy Carter had been the very first star. Thomas no longer sat behind the glass walls of the CEO's office. He had stepped down months ago, taking on a quieter role as an advisor and dedicating more time to philanthropy, community outreach, and, though he never said it aloud, to 2 girls who had gently rebuilt his broken heart. That morning, the company was hosting its annual Inspiration Gala, honoring those whose stories had touched and changed the organization. The grand hall shimmered with warm lighting, and hundreds of employees filled the seats in respectful silence as Emma stepped onto the stage. She wore a simple white blouse, her pale blonde hair gently draped over her shoulders. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the microphone, but her voice, though soft, carried deep into the room. "There was a time I worked in silence," she began. "Late at night, quietly cleaning, hiding the fact that I was sick, because I was afraid. Afraid that if anyone found out, I'd lose my job. And if I lost my job, I couldn't feed my daughter." There was a pause. Her voice thickened with emotion, but she didn't stop. "But someone saw me, not as a burden, not as a statistic, but as a person. That kindness changed my life." She looked toward the crowd, then down at Amy, sitting in the front row, beaming proudly. "I've learned that accepting help is not weakness. Sometimes it's the most courageous thing we can do, because it allows someone else the chance to love, to heal, and to grow beside us." The room erupted in applause. Later that evening, after the applause had faded and the lights had dimmed, Emma, Amy, and Thomas strolled quietly through Central Park. Snow flurries drifted from the sky like feathers, and Amy dashed ahead, giggling as she chased them. Thomas and Emma walked side by side, shoulders nearly touching. She glanced over at him and asked quietly, "If one day I'm completely okay, healthy, stable, not needing anyone's help, will you still stay?" Thomas turned toward her, his eyes warm beneath the faint glow of the lamplight. "I'm not staying because you need me," he said. "I'm staying because I need you." Emma looked down, smiling. Her hand found his, and this time, she didn't let go. A few paces ahead, Amy turned around, her cheeks rosy from the cold. "Mommy," she asked curiously, "is Mr. Thomas your boyfriend?" Both adults froze for a second, then laughed. They didn't answer. They didn't need to. The only response was the quiet squeeze of a hand in the falling snow. And for the first time in a long time, everything felt exactly right. Thank you for watching this touching journey of love, resilience, and healing. If this story stirred your heart, reminded you of someone you cherish, or simply made you feel a little less alone, don't forget to support us. Hit that hype button and subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories for more emotional, life-changing tales that warm your soul. Every share, every comment, and every click helps us continue telling stories that matter. Until next time, take care, love deeply, and never underestimate the quiet strength of kindness.